Dog Island, written by Mike Stewart.
From the beach, the child holding the hand of her father, those burial clouds that lower Victoria soon to devour all, watching, silently weeps. From On the Beach at Night by Walt Whitman. The motor stopped. Cool rain glanced off the windshield and side windows in gray needles and disappeared into the dark sheet of water stretched across the parking lot. Inside the car, a sinewy boy with sun-bleached hair leaned across the center console and pushed his mouth against a teenage girl's lips. She put her hand on the back of his head, and the boy began to fondle her breasts with his left hand. Pulling away, the girl popped open the passenger door and stepped out onto wet pavement, where she spun in a circle, her arms extended and her palms cupped to catch the rain. Even at night, her face glowed from warm days of Florida sun. Thick black hair bounced against her shoulder blades as she turned. The boy said something from inside the car. The girl stopped and ran across the pavement onto the sand toward the surf, where she disappeared into the night. The boy muttered something, then followed. He found her sitting on a scattered path of gray and white shells at the high tide mark, kicking at waves with her toes as they lapped against her feet and calves. He sat down on the sand behind her, encircled her hips with his legs, and reached around from behind to hold both of her breasts in sunburned hands. She seemed not to notice. She sat and watched whitecaps roll across the rain-spattered gulf. Growing restless for a response, he pulled her over backward and rolled on top of her. His hands met behind her neck and his legs intertwined with hers. Their mouths worked together while her hands slowly kneaded the sand beside her hips. Without warning or finesse, he shoved her windbreaker shirt and bra up to her neck. He moved down to kiss her breasts. The girl lay still for seconds while his mouth moved over her nipples. Her hands squeezed pockets of sand. Tears filled the corners of her closed eyes and rolled down her cheekbones and temples, mixing with the salt spray and cool raindrops in her hair. "Stop!" The boy didn't respond, except to press harder against her with his hips and to work more frantically with his tongue. "Stop, please!" She pushed him away and stood up. He watched her breasts until she had untangled her clothes and pulled them back into place. She looked out again at the whitecaps. Behind her, the boy walked back up the beach and climbed into his Mustang. The girl turned and walked away down the shoreline. In the distance, she could hear the car drive away. She carried her sandals dangling from 2 fingers and squeezed the sharp, cool sand with her toes as she walked. The rhythms and the scents of the Gulf echoed the rhythms and scents of childhood. They reminded her in a softer, easier way of the Atlantic shore. There was still the throb of distant hurt in the waves, but she needed the sound. Maybe she even needed the hurt. She hugged her windbreaker tight. All around her, swirls of fog hung low on the beach, obscuring the shadows in the sand. She had hoped the boy in the Mustang would walk with her and softly kiss her, and maybe tell her something about the stars. But that wasn't life. She had known that when he asked her out. Now she had no way to get home. The girl walked until the creosote pilings marking the end of public access beaches materialized out of the night. Turning her back to the water, she moved up the beach and found a lounge chair on the patio of a pastel beach house. There was no car on the oyster shell driveway and no sign of life inside. She pressed her fist against the flesh between her stomach and chest, closed her eyes, and tried to sleep. Voices floated out of the beach house, and she sighed. Moving quietly out of the chair, she walked around the corner of the house opposite the driveway and headed for the road. A few paces ahead, a jagged rectangle of light fell from a window onto a tangle of seagrass, cockleburs, and dirty sand. She turned toward the beach, but the sound of something or someone falling brought her back. Crouching to the side of the window, she peered through the slats of a bamboo blind that hung against the inside of the glass. She saw 4 men in the room. One lay on the floor and seemed hurt. The others were standing. 2 wore tank tops, cutoffs, and caps. One of the 2 had tattoos on both arms. The 4th man was larger than the others, over 6 feet, and bulky, like a weightlifter or an ex-jock going to fat. He wore tan dress pants and a red short-sleeved shirt. The big one seemed to say something, and the other 2 picked up the injured man by his armpits. Someone was talking. A baritone hum floated into the night. She saw the big man pull a pistol out of the back of his waistband and put it in the hurt man's mouth. A loud thump bounced against the glass in the window, and the hurt man's cheeks flashed iridescent blood red like a kid shining a flashlight into his mouth on a summer evening. At the same time, the man's head popped back, and he sagged between the two men in cutoffs. The next instant, all three men swiveled their heads to look at the window. She may have tried to say no, but what came out was shapeless and guttural. Not something so precise as a word. The big man started out of the room. The other two dropped the dead man and followed. Within seconds, all three were outside searching the beach. They found nothing to account for the sound. Spring rains east of Baton Rouge had poured fog across Mobile Bay. A cool breeze, stirred up by warm days and cool nights, swept down the beach and across the second-floor deck where it tugged at my robe. Inside, through French doors, red dots hovered in the dark over the bedside table, showing that it was a little after 4 in the morning. Glenfiddich Scotch and Umberto Eco had finally put me under a little after midnight, about 3 hours before I woke and wandered out on the deck. I was getting used to it. You can get a lot of thinking done if you aren't able to sleep. The bedroom phone was ringing. A greenish-white glow pulsed next to the red dots on the clock. The answering machine was off, and I watched the telephone ring for most of a minute before walking into the bedroom. I picked up the receiver and cleared my throat. Hello? A woman's voice said, Tom? Yeah, this is Tom. Tom, this is Susan Fitzsimmons. I apologize for calling in the middle of the night. I felt for the switch on the bedside lamp, and yellow light jarred the backs of my eyes. Are you all right? Susan said, I'm fine. Something bad has happened, though. What do you mean by something bad? There's someone here with me who needs to talk to you. We need some legal advice on how to handle a situation. I had known Susan 6 months. We met in early October when fall was just starting to cool the Gulf Coast. She was smart, graceful, striking, and I had almost gotten her killed. Or at least, I was one reason among many why Susan found herself limping through the holidays recovering from knife wounds. One set of reasons was that her artist husband had gotten greedy, crossed my little brother, and ended up with his throat sliced. Another was that I had stuck my nose in and figured out what happened, and along the way managed to bring an impressively dangerous person into Susan's life. Now she had some scars, and a murdered husband, and apparently a friend in trouble. I had a dead brother and a long line of sleepless nights, and I was not blind to the possibility that, over the past few months, I might have been wallowing in it a bit. I reached for the pen and pad on the bedside table. Where are you? We're at the beach house in St. George. The girl who needs to talk to you is, she paused, a friend of mine here on the island. She thinks she may have seen someone get killed. You know, murdered, earlier tonight on the beach. I thought, damn. I'm assuming she wasn't involved. No, well, only to the extent that she saw it happen. Well, then the advice is easy. Call the cops. She wasn't involved, but it's more complicated than that. Susan sounded unsure of what to say. I think she needs to talk to a lawyer. I guess it's silly, but I am uncomfortable talking this way. Part of the problem is, well, you know how it is down here on the coast. Somebody disappears, or you see somebody flashing a wad of money, or somebody looks like they're up to no good. First thing that pops into your head is it's got something to do with drugs. And you never know whose brother or cousin or friend might be involved, so you don't know who's safe to talk to. She thinks she saw some kind of drug hit? Tom, she doesn't know what it was. Just that somebody got killed right in front of her, and she's scared out of her mind. And here's the complicated part. She's a runaway, and she's a minor. She's absolutely terrified that her family's going to find out where she is and come get her. You know, if she goes to the police and they check her out and find out she's a runaway. Susan, maybe her father or mother coming to get her is the best thing that could come out of this. I don't think so. What do you mean you don't think so? You can't decide something like that on your own. In this case, I can. I guess there's something you're not telling me? She didn't answer. I gave up. When did it happen? When did what happen? The murder. When did this friend, what's her name? Carly Santana. When did Carly see this happen? About 3 hours ago, I think. Shit. Yes, I know, Susan hesitated. She needs to talk to a lawyer, Tom. I hate to ask, but could you come down here? Susan, I know she's scared, but I'm not a criminal attorney. Hell, I'm not even licensed in Florida. And I'm supposed to be at a meeting in Tuscaloosa this afternoon. My advice is to find a good local attorney, somebody who's down at the courthouse every week drinking coffee with the prosecutors and bailiffs, and work through him or her. Susan lowered her voice. Tom, it's taken me 2 hours to get her to let me make this call. She had cupped her hand over the mouthpiece, and her muffled words buzzed around the edges. Carly doesn't know who to trust down here, and neither do I. If you don't help, she's just going to leave here and try to deal with it by herself, and she's not really capable of doing that. I didn't respond. Seconds passed as faint static filled the earpiece. Finally, Susan just repeated my name with what sounded like a little shame sprinkled over it. My mouth tasted bitter and smoky from last night's scotch and 3 hours' sleep. I breathed deeply to clear my head and looked out at the night. Light from the bedside lamp had washed out the view through open French doors, merging sea and sky and clouds into one black sheet. Susan waited some more while I decided to do the right thing. I'll be there around mid-morning, I said finally. Thanks. I'm sorry to do this to you. Don't worry about it. I should have said yes right away. Puffs of clean air rolled through the open door and across the bed. I walked into the bathroom and splashed water against my face and neck before going to the phone and punching in a 7-digit number. A deep voice, wide awake, answered on the second ring. We've got to check out something on St. George Island. The best investigator on the Gulf, maybe one of the best anywhere, said, You know what time it is? It's 20 till 5. I know what time it is. Joey didn't call me a dipshit, but it was there in his tone. What's on St. George's Island that's worth me hauling my ass out of bed this time of morning? Somebody's dead. Anybody I know? Got no idea. That's what I need you to find out. You got any contacts over around the Apalachicola St. George area? No. Hang on a second. I heard some rustling and a few clicking sounds, and Joey came back on the line. Okay, go ahead. I just got a call from Susan Fitzsimmons. She okay? Susan's fine, but she's got some friend on St. George who thinks she saw some guy or maybe some woman get killed tonight. You're kidding. No, I'm not. For one hell of a good person, Susan's got some bad karma junking up her life. I was thinking the same thing. I said, yeah, well, she needs some help. So, I was hoping you could sniff around the cops in Apalachicola and see if anything's been reported. I could do it, but... He interrupted. But they ain't going to tell some lawyer shit. You just start 'em beating the bushes. Joey paused and then went on. Yeah, I can do that. Don't know anybody down there in the fucking boonies, but I got a couple of boys on the Panama City force who fish around for me. Cost a couple of bills. That okay? Sure, fine. Thanks. Give me the details. I looked at the pad on my bedside table. Exactly 7 words were written on it. Susan, St. George Island, Carly Santana, and murder. I don't know any. Joey sighed and hung up. Before stepping into the shower, I called the office and left voicemail for my secretary, Kelly. I told her to call the prospective client I was supposed to meet that afternoon and make something up. A few minutes later, as hot water began to sting my chest and shoulders, I thought about the timber tycoon in Tuscaloosa who, after receiving Kelly's call, would be seeking legal advice elsewhere. And I realized that it was all part of my grand plan. A year ago, I had bailed from a fat 6-figure job to start a solo practice, and now, blowing off wealthy, paying clients was the next logical step in my strategy to avoid worldly distractions like money and success and solving legal problems for people who could actually afford to pay me. I squirted shampoo into my palm and rubbed my hands together. Maybe Carly would turn out to be a runaway heiress. A few minutes after 6:30, a blue Ford Expedition crunched onto the white gravel drive. I stepped out onto the porch. Heavy dew had darkened the tops of the weathered banisters. Smudged swirls of orange and pink glowed in the east beneath a light gray sky. Joey stepped out of the car, and I said, "Good morning." Joey said, "Morning," as he climbed the front steps and turned sideways to navigate the entry hall on his way to the kitchen. It was a tight fit. I'm 6 feet tall, and I could look Joey squarely in the throat if I concentrated on my posture. He was 6'6", and 240 pounds of muscle and bone. He looked like a lost Viking. Short, white-blonde hair, ruddy, sun-creased skin, and hard gray eyes the color of a new tin roof. That morning the Viking wore pleated olive-green khakis, a cream-colored rugby shirt, and hush-puppies without socks. I followed and found Joey standing in front of my open refrigerator, drinking out of a half-gallon carton of Tropicana pure premium orange juice. "Help yourself." "That's what I thought I was doing. Been up half the friggin' night looking for a dead guy who probably ain't even dead. You got any of those sesame seed bagels you had the last time I was here?" "I found 'em." "Want some breakfast?" Joey ignored the question. He found a knife, cut 2 bagels in half, and popped them in the toaster oven. I poured 2 cups of coffee and gave one to Joey. He smeared cream cheese on the 4 toasted bagel halves and put all 4 on his plate. When he was seated at the kitchen table, I said, "No dead guys, is that the story?" Joey said, "That's the story." "Well, did you find out anything from your Panama City contacts besides the fact that no murder has been reported?" Joey talked over a mouthful of bagel. "Like what?" "I don't know. I thought maybe you go the lowdown on the cops in Apalachicola. Or you fished around for some general information about whether they've had any trouble down that way." "No cops. Just the sheriff's office. Sheriff Todd Wilson." "Todd? They got a yuppie beach sheriff?" "From what I could find out, Wilson wouldn't know a yuppie if he ate one. Word is, though, he's a good enough guy. Probably as honest as most small-town sheriffs along the coast." Joey paused to drain the rest of the orange juice from the carton he had lifted from my refrigerator. "What's that mean?" "What's what mean?" "What do you mean he's as honest as most sheriffs along the coast?" "It means he keeps the peace. You know, he keeps the streets safe for old ladies and tourists. But the rumor is that he also takes a little money every now and then to ignore the Bodines." "The what?" "Kind of a redneck mafia. The cops down there call them the Bodines, you know, like Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies. Lots of jokes about this bunch of rednecks ciphering their profits and that kind of shit. But they run the coast down there, and they're organized. Half of them are related to each other." "And that's all you know right now?" "That's it. No murders, no bodies, nothing." I asked Joey to lock up and left him sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee and reading my morning Mobile Register. By 7, I was in my Cherokee cruising down scenic 98 toward Apalachicola and the causeway to St. George Island. I flipped on the radio to drown out the whine of mud grips on blacktop. National Public Radio out of Mobile lasted through Foley and Pensacola, across Pensacola Bay and into Navarre. Outside Fort Walton, static drowned out NPR. An oldies station out of Panama City filled the Jeep with a different noise as 98 wound next to Choctawhatchee Bay, past the New Money Easter egg villas at Seaside and the Old Money Resort at Grayton Beach, and then cut through the spring break motels, neon signs, and giant water slides that pollute Panama City Beach. East of Panama City, used car and mobile home lots with hand-painted signs, boxy fast food joints, and staccato stoplights dissolved into pine forests that sporadically separated the pavement from a clear view of the Gulf. After an hour of nothing, the road bumped into the quick mart and fast food outskirts of Apalachicola, and then eased into that quaint seaside town's Victorian architecture and palm-lined streets. I killed the radio and tried to think about what I would say to Susan and her friend about witnessing a crime and the best way to handle involvement with the police. I couldn't think of anything. Without music, the mud grips whirred again on the causeway that stretches from the east end of Apalachicola to the bay side of St. George's Island. I drove to the ocean side of the island, turned right away from the state park, and cruised between rows of stilted, hurricane-ready vacation homes. As the road moved away from the center of the island, the houses grew generally newer and larger, until I turned away from the ocean and then left into the plantation. An overstuffed guard's uniform shuffled out of the gatehouse and asked my business. I asked for directions to Susan Fitzsimmons' house. He found my name on a clipboard, handed me a green tag to hang from my rearview mirror, and told me how to get where I was going. Back over on the Gulf side of the island, I found a 2-story Caribbean plantation-style beach house with the right numbers. Latticework and tropical plants camouflaged the hurricane stilts. Above the crisscross pattern, weathered gray siding contrasted with white trim work around windows and doors, and highlighted an oversized round window suspended beneath a gable's point above the back entrance. A banistered crow's nest stretched 20 feet across the apex of a green copper roof, providing what had to be one hell of a view of the water. I smiled. Sticking out of the carport, beneath the house was Susan's antique step-side pickup. I parked on oyster shell paving behind Susan's truck and climbed wooden steps to the main door. I pressed the doorbell. Someone was moving inside the house. Susan Fitzsimmons opened the door and smiled with perfect white teeth and sun-crinkled eyes. She stepped out, gave me a quick but exuberant hug, and stepped back to look at my face. "You look great." She did. The last time I'd seen Susan, she'd been lying in a hospital bed with clear plastic tubes looped into her arms and nostrils. She'd been pale and tired and frightened. Now Susan looked like Susan again, sun-streaked blonde hair worn short and shaggy, tan cheeks, and intelligent blue eyes. Susan is from the Midwest and has never had the penchant for small talk that Southerners think is part of good manners, or, as she calls it, talking until you can think of something to say. Now all Susan said was, "Come in. Carly's inside." The door opened into a cavernous room featuring a large circular staircase made of polished aluminum that swirled upward against the left wall. 12 feet up, metal stairs connected to a wooden catwalk that hung from the left and right walls, wrapped around the back wall that held the door we had come through, and apparently provided access to bedrooms on the second level. On the right wall, a 6-foot oil painting of nothing but dozens of beautifully detailed seashells flooded the room with color. Glass stretched across the front of the room, showing huge rectangles of ocean and sky framed by rough-cut beams. Susan's kitchen lay to the right against the back wall. It was separated from the main living room by a long antique butcher's table surrounded by brushed aluminum chairs that echoed the staircase. Next to the table sat a striking teenage girl with blue-black hair, dark brown eyes set in a pretty oval face, and sun-tanned legs which she displayed beneath blue jeans cutoffs with slits up the outside seams that ended high enough to show just a hint of where her panties curved around her hips. Above the jeans, 4 inches of skin and a very attractive navel were on display beneath a green knit shirt designed to show off young navels. She sat with her ankles crossed and her legs extended toward us as we entered. She wore black sports sandals with blue Aztec designs on the straps, and her toenails were painted pink. A yellow windbreaker hung across the back of her chair. "Tom, this is Carly. Carly, this is the friend I told you about." Carly uncrossed her ankles, recrossed them with the other foot on top, and smiled a strange, somehow inappropriate smile. Her pelvis seemed to rise up in the chair as she moved her legs, and she said, "Nice to meet you." She had some kind of working-class northern accent. I was suddenly a little irritated. I said, Can your friend excuse us for a minute?" Carly stopped smiling. Susan asked her to please step outside for a moment, and Carly stood and walked out onto the deck. I said, "What was that about?" Susan said, "A brave front." "That didn't look like a brave front. That looked like a plain old come and get it." Which I guess is fine, and maybe she's old enough to advertise if she wants to. But don't you think the Lolita routine is a little out of place, considering what she says happened to her last night? Susan studied my face. She was thinking, and I was standing there waiting for her to do it. It's her way. Some time ticked by, then Susan spoke softly. "Carly's a good person, and she's a lot smarter than you think when you first meet her. She waits tables at the Pelican's Roost. I eat there a good deal when I'm down here, and I've gotten to know her. Carly doesn't know I know this, but she used to switch tables with other waitresses so she could wait on me whenever I came in." "What's that, some kind of mother complex?" "No, at least I don't think that's part of it. She wants to be an artist, and somebody told her Bird Fitzsimmons had been my husband. We started talking, and she knew all about him. Carly was kind of proud of the fact that she was once thrown out of the gallery in New Orleans that handles Bird's paintings because she hung around them for half a day just looking. Why would they throw her out for looking? I thought that was what you were supposed to do at galleries. Susan smiled. You're innocent. You're supposed to buy art at commercial galleries. Looking is only foreplay for people who can afford to consummate. And as Carly said, she had "broke runaway" written all over her. I'm telling you, Tom, Carly's got a lot going for her, but however smart or artistic or sensitive she can be, for some reason, what you just saw seems to be the only way she knows how to act around men. Well, nothing has been reported to the authorities that supports her story, which could just mean the killer is either lucky or good. But take it all together, and you have to wonder if we're wasting our time here. You have to admit she doesn't exactly look traumatized and desperate for help. Susan said, Go talk to her. I walked out onto the deck and closed the glass door. Carly was leaning against a weathered railing, staring down the beach to her left. How old are you? When I spoke, she turned to face me and propped her left hip against the rail. Tears had drawn dark, wet rails across her cheeks down to her jawline, but I couldn't decide whether she was upset or angry. She wasn't wearing makeup. She didn't need any. What difference does it make? Susan says you're a minor. She repeated the same question. Look, Carly, Susan asked me to help you, and she says the reason you can't go to the police and tell them what happened is because you're a minor and you're a runaway. So I'd like to know how old you are. It could make a difference, a legal difference, as to whether your family has any right to come get you. Also, if I'm going to help you, you've got to trust me enough to answer some questions. And we don't have time to argue about whether everything I ask you makes a difference. 16, I'm 16. When's your birthday? What? It's in May, the 5th. So you're going to be 17 in May? No, I guess I'm not really 16 yet. I'll be 16 in May. You look older than 15. Yeah, they let me serve beer at the restaurant. Nobody said anything. She seemed to focus on the pupils in my eyes. I guess I'm more developed than most girls at my age. As she spoke, Carly began to stroke her bare stomach with her index finger in a calculatedly absent-minded way. She noticed that I noticed, and her expression changed. She looked like maybe she knew a secret that I didn't. What happened last night? I was down on a public beach with this guy I met. What's his name? Bobby. Anyway, I interrupted. Bobby what? I don't think he told me. He's a local, works at the Chevron station in town. Anyway, he picked me up at 1 after I got off at the Pelican, and we drove down to the parking lot at the public beach. After a few minutes, we got out and walked down to the beach. I like it at night. Anyway, we stayed there a while, and Bobby left. He just left you there on the beach when you two were done? Carly's face flushed red. We weren't done the way you say it. I don't just do it like that. No offense, Carly, I'm not judging you. It just sounds like the guy acted like a jerk. He left because I wouldn't do it, in case you're wondering. It had been a long time since I'd talked to a 15-year-old girl about her sex life. In fact, I had never talked to a 15-year-old girl about her sex life. Well, let's talk about what happened after Bobby left. How did you get from there to witnessing a murder? Carly told me she had walked on the beach, tried to crash on the patio of a seemingly empty beach house, and ended up witnessing murder through a bedroom window. She described the men who came out and searched the beach while she darted from one dark house to another, finally making her way to Susan's door. By the time Carly finished her story, tears had overfilled her wide brown eyes and began rolling down her cheeks. Susan was right. As Carly talked, she had become the adolescent she was, and she looked genuinely frightened. Carly rubbed the tears away with her palms while I stood there feeling impotent and wishing I carried a handkerchief in my back pocket the way my father always did. When she was composed, we went back inside. While we were outside, Susan had piled brunch on the long butcher's table. We all ate and made polite conversation. Afterwards, Susan walked me to the Jeep. We were back on the driveway, well away from Carly, when Susan simply said, Well, I'm pretty sure that something happened, I said. I don't think she's just looking for attention, but if she is, she's got me fooled. Maybe she's that good. Who knows? Anyone who claims they can tell if a truly dishonest person is lying is full of it. You just can't. Now it was Susan's turn to sound irritated. "Carly's got some problems, but I told you. She's basically a good kid." "I'm not calling her a liar. Like I said, I think she saw something, and I think whatever it was scared the hell out of her. It's exactly what she saw that's in question." Susan started to argue, and I held up my hand to stop her. Just hang on. If we knew for certain that a crime had been committed, I'd want to report it even if that's not really required under the law. But we don't know what happened. So let's say I stop by the sheriff's office in town and tell him I have a client who saw some shady-looking guys up to no good last night at this particular beach house, and we're just concerned that someone may have gotten hurt. If the sheriff checks it out and it's nothing, then Carly probably need never come forward. Susan said, "That's fine if it works out that way, but what if it's not nothing?" "Well, if we find blood splattered all over the walls, then we'll negotiate some kind of deal to keep her identity secret. She's a minor, so that's possible. Maybe we could also get you appointed Carly's guardian ad litem until this mess is over." "Is that the best you can come up with?" I smiled. "No, there are other things we can do, including just telling them that my client refuses to testify. The DA can't compel her testimony if he doesn't know who she is, and, as her attorney, I don't have to tell them. But first we need to find out if—" Susan raised an eyebrow. "Okay. First we need to find out what actually happened last night. Don't worry. If the cops find blood all over the place, then I'll either negotiate a deal to keep Carly's name out of it, or we just won't let her talk to them." Susan told me the name of the house in question. In resort towns, every little hovel has a desperately cute name. And I prepared to dance my jig for the sheriff. I drove into Apalachicola and found the sheriff's office, a squatty yellow brick building wedged between two Victorian homes that had been converted into offices for a few lawyers and accountants and a couple of real estate agents. Inside, at the front desk, a pleasant young woman with an overbite wearing a telephone operator's headset asked if she could help. I said I was hoping to see a deputy. She pushed a button, waited, and spoke into her headset. A few seconds later, a friendly red-headed guy came through the door. He looked like he smiled a lot, and that's what he did as he introduced himself as Deputy Mickey Burns. He looked strong, and he had a scattering of faded blue Marine Corps tattoos competing for space among a few hundred freckles and a carpet of reddish-blonde hair on his forearms. I told the story I'd rehearsed. He smiled some more and said, "Let's go have a look." 20 minutes later, we pulled onto the driveway of Seashore Cottage in the deputy's patrol car and parked behind a white truck with a chrome toolbox installed behind the cab. 2 5-gallon plastic paint buckets lay on their sides in the sand and clover that made up the front yard. The deputy said, "Looks like they're having some work done." I agreed that it looked just like that. He thought for a few seconds and asked, "You think maybe your client saw some construction workers horsing around and got the wrong idea?" I agree, you never knows, but I don't think so. That really doesn't fit what my client told me. Deputy Mickey Burns exhaled through his nose, looked out at the water, and said, "Well, let's go look around." We both stepped out of the car into a bright spring day. The cottage was a classic Florida beach bunker. Concrete block, aqua blue exterior, white asphalt roof, and running along one side, a privacy wall constructed of decorative cement blocks turned on edge so that you could see through the inside pattern. A pair of mirror-image oversized plaster casts of seahorses flanked the front door. The cottage sat at ground level and would violate every high wind and water damage construction spec on the books if it were built today. Local law enforcement took the lead, and I followed. After banging on the aluminum door jamb, the deputy pulled open the screen door and walked inside. "Yo, who's here?" No one answered, but I could hear what sounded like an old Leonard Skinner song bouncing around some other part of the house. We walked down a short hall and into what seemed to be a bedroom. Drop cloths were draped over the furniture, the carpet had been pulled up, and 2 guys in shorts and sandals and not much else were working hard at brushing white paint onto white walls. The deputy said, "Can't you all hear back here?" At least that's what I think he said. All I heard was, "Can't you all hear?" Before one of the painters yelled, "Shit!" and spun around, slinging a thick streak of white across his buddy's shoulder. The deputy held up both palms and said, "Whoa, nothing to get excited about here. We're just looking around." The jumpy painter smiled now and said, You scared the hell out of us." The deputy said, "Sorry about that. We knocked, and then I yelled for you in the front room there. I guess you couldn't hear over the music." The painter, with a new white stripe on his shoulder, didn't smile. He did walk over and flip off a paint-speckled boombox plugged into a wall outlet. The talkative one said, "What can we do for you?" The deputy introduced me to the two painters by name, which even then seemed like a bad idea. The one who was doing all the talking said, "Hey," and gave their names, Tim and Sonny. My escort then explained that someone on the island had called me the night before and reported that they had seen some guys up to no good at Seashore Cottage. Tim, who was apparently the only one of the two with the gift of speech, laughed and said, "Me and old Sonny here are generally up to no good all night." We all laughed a little, everybody except Sonny. Tim laughed because he thought he was funny, and the deputy and I laughed to be polite. The bare-chested, pain-spattered Sonny glanced furtively around the room while paint dribbled from the brush in his hand onto the bare concrete floor. Deputy Mickey said, "I don't know if anything happened around here last night or not, and I don't think Mr. McInnes really knows either. He just had somebody." The deputy turned to look at me. Was it a man or a woman? I don't even know whether to call him or her here." I stared at him for a couple of seconds while trying to decide why he would ask that in front of Tim and Sonny, whether it really made a difference that he had, and finally, how much of a schmuck I would look like if I refused to answer. I said, "A man. The client is a man." And I said it just after enough pause and with just the right emphasis to look like I was completely full of shit. The deputy looked a little confused, said, "Okay," and went on talking to Tim and Sonny. "Mr. McGinnis' client says he saw 3 guys hauling a 4th guy around who looked like he was hurt. Said it was late last night sometime." Tim fixed his face into a look of concern. Sonny glanced around the room some more, and I was beginning to regret giving too many details to Deputy Mickey. Tim said, "Me and Sonny worked here pretty late last night. We had to get the carpet up and out before we could start painting this morning, so we just kept at it till it was done." I asked why. Tim said, "What do you mean?" "Why pull up the carpet? I mean, if the owner's going to keep it, you could just cover it with drop cloths like you did the furniture. And if you're planning to throw it out and put in new carpeting, why not just use the old carpet for a drop cloth and tear it up later?" Tim looked theatrically puzzled. The deputy scrunched up his face in thought and said, "Yeah, I don't know why we're that worried about the carpet, but what he says makes sense. If you wanted—" Sonny, the mute painter, blurted out, "It stunk." We all looked at him. He'd stopped glancing around the room and focused his eyes on mine. I liked it better when he couldn't focus. He looked a little nuts. "We got it out of here 'cause it stunk. The roof must have leaked or something and got it wet. All I know is it smelled like it stunk when we come in here to do the job. I told him I wasn't going to paint nothing till that rug was gone." Tim joined in. "That's a fact, buddy. First thing we did was rip it up and get it out of here." Sonny continued to stare into my eyes. I asked, "What happened to it?" Tim said, "Took it to the dump, probably buried under a few tons of garbage by now. Don't know why you'd care, though." The deputy said, "We're getting off the point here. All I want to know is if either of you all saw anything last night or this morning that didn't look right, and if anybody else came with you or stopped by yesterday." Sonny resumed his wandering eyes act, and Tim said, "Nope and nope. Just another job, Sheriff." "Deputy Sheriff." "Sorry. Nobody got hurt around here that we know about, Deputy." Deputy Mickey thanked them and then, as if it were an afterthought, asked, "Have you two got a contract or work order or something like that from the owner for this work?" Tim said, "Yes, sir, we sure do. Out in the truck." The deputy asked if he could see it, and the rest of our little group left Sonny alone to continue his eye exercises. Outside, Tim lifted a metal clipboard off the truck seat, flipped open the cover, and handed it to Deputy Mickey. I read it over his shoulder. The only page in the clip was a work order from Dolphin Rentals, authorizing carpet replacement and new paint in the bedroom of 1 Seashore Cottage. The work order was dated 2 weeks earlier and signed by Billy Timmons, agent. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Mickey walked me to my car. I got in and rolled down the front 2 windows. He bent down, leaned 2 furry, tattooed forearms on the driver's window, and peered inside the Jeep. He smelled faintly of sweat and citrus aftershave. He said, Well, that looked like a wild goose chase, but chasing wild geese is mostly what the job is about. You happy?" I wasn't a damn bit happy, but I just shrugged and said, "Sure, at least I can report back to my client. I'm sure he'll be relieved no one was hurt." Deputy Mickey said, "Yeah, we can all be happy about that. Anyway, I was glad to help." He fixed a reassuring smile on his face and turned to walk away. I asked, Does your department keep ownership records on the houses on St. George?" Burns stopped and turned back. "We probably got that information around somewhere, but if you're a lawyer, you can find it as easy as I can by going by the courthouse." "Well, I just thought you might be able to save some time." Deputy Burns smiled again. Very nice, very friendly, but we both knew he was done with me. Then he turned and walked inside the sheriff's building. I backed out and once again turned southeast toward St. George Island. Back at the beach house, I discovered that Carly was gone. Susan had given her a ride to the restaurant so she would be there to help set up for the lunch crowd. In light of my unsettling encounter with Tim and Sonny, I wasn't happy about my new client running around the island unescorted. But Susan assured me that she had impressed on Carly the need to keep her mouth shut. Susan added, "It's hard anyway to get Carly to say much of anything except just making small talk, or, if she's really comfortable, maybe talking about being an artist one day. I think you learn early to keep secrets when you grow up in a family like hers." I asked, "What kind of a family does she have? You've mentioned a couple of times that she's terrified about going home, but you've never said why." "I really don't know exactly, and I don't know why I tried to sound dramatic and sage about keeping secret. The whole thing sounds a little Barbara Walters, doesn't it?" "It sounds like you're making it up as you go, if that's what you mean." Susan gave me a look. "I just know that Carly's scared to death of having to go back, and I know it's not just some high school angst thing, and I know that she won't talk about it." Susan paused and said, "What did you find out at the sheriff's office?" I told her. I recited my morning's adventure and jotted down notes while the whole mess was fresh in my mind. Later, I would transfer the notes to my laptop, just as I did with every case, so they would be available for word searches and for preparing a chronology of the facts. While I was writing out a summary of my meetings with Deputy Mickey Burns and the painting duo of Tim and Sonny, Susan pulled out her yellow pages and looked up Dolphin Rentals, which turned out to be a small real estate company in Apalachicola. She punched in the number and asked for Billy Timmons. Miss Timmons was not in the office and would not be back for another 4 days, but she did handle Seashore Cottage and had full authority to authorize normal repairs to the property. Susan and I sat in her living room and looked at each other for a while. Now she was thinking, and I was watching her do it. Finally she said, "Okay, what about the paint? They can't just slap some paint on the walls and cover up all traces of blood. I mean, I know real life isn't like cop shows on TV, but the police are more sophisticated than that, aren't they?" "Sure they are. The cops could probably peel the walls and find some bloodstains between the paint layers. But they'd need sufficient probable cause to get a search warrant that would allow them not only to search the cottage, but also to strip the walls looking for bloodstains. Which sounds like a good idea, except that a warrant that allows destruction of property is pretty hard to get. At a minimum, any judge would want an eyewitness before he allowed something like that to happen." I stood and stretched out my back. "I'm afraid something like that would take Carly coming forward and making a sworn statement." Susan started to speak, and I said, "And even if Carly did that, we couldn't be certain the cops would find enough evidence to do anything. A little blood on the wall doesn't mean much without a body." Susan looked disappointed. "We should be able to do something." I said, "We will. We just don't know what it is yet." A few quiet seconds passed before Susan's head snapped up from the impact of a sudden thought. "Tom, shouldn't we be over there to follow those painter guys when they leave?" "No." "Why not? They've got to be connected some way with the murder if we followed them." I sat up and put my elbows on my knees and looked at Susan. If we followed them, they'd probably spot us a mile down the road. Neither of us is qualified to do that kind of thing well, and if Tim and Sonny did spot us tagging along behind their pickup, we could count one of two things happening. One, they would know we were onto them, which would cause them to take off down some swamp road to the middle of nowhere and hide. Or two, they would know we were onto them, which would cause them to turn around and attempt to do us bodily harm. In either case, we've announced that I didn't buy their good old boy routine at the cottage, and in one case, we could end up hurt or worse. You sure about this? I've got the tag number and make of the truck, their descriptions, and the names they gave us. This is a small place. If we need to find them again, I imagine Joey can do it in an hour or two. Susan and I wandered out onto the deck. Frustration and feelings of impotency seemed to be working on her, and I felt pretty much the same way. Maybe I was handling it better because, for a lot of reasons, the feelings were less foreign to me. Finally, we decided to load into my Jeep to go have another look at Seashore Cottage. We made a reconnaissance trip past the cottage and saw that Tim's truck had departed, taking Tim and Sonny and the plastic paint buckets with it. I turned around in a driveway 3 doors down, backtracked, and pulled onto the now familiar parking pad of Carly's nightmare house. We got out. For the second time that day, I approached the giant seahorse-guarded door of Seashore Cottage with the intention of conducting some sort of investigation. Through the front bedroom window, we could see that the paint job was lousy, but finished. The drop cloths had vanished, and the bed and other furniture had been shoved back into place. Susan said, "Poof." Yeah, like magic. I walked around to the side window to peer inside the way Carly had the night before. Susan said, "Look at the floor." I cupped my hand against the glass to block the sun's glare and looked down at the bare paint-splattered concrete. "You think they're coming back later to put down new carpet?" She was being sarcastic. I said, "I wouldn't count on it." I drove Susan to her beach house. Along the way, a running debate streamed through my mind. Should I stay on St. George with Susan and the girl or head back to Mobile? On the one hand, I didn't much like the idea of leaving Susan and Carly alone on the island. Emotionally, it felt like I was deserting them. On the other hand, my surprise meeting with Tim and Sonny had turned my presence into a liability. As we turned into Susan's driveway, I decided that putting some distance between my clients and myself seemed the smartest way to go. I explained my reasoning to Susan. She agreed and promised to keep an eye on Carly. I promised to try to think of something useful to do. It had not been a successful day, and the drive home seemed endless. Back at my place, I checked in with Kelly, my secretary, and made a few business calls before wandering down the beach to the Grand Hotel for dinner. I thought a good meal might make me feel better. It usually does. It didn't. Back snug in my living room, I checked my answering machine, turned the recording volume and the ringer all the way down, and spent a couple of unfocused hours with Umberto Eco. The hell with it. I started getting ready for bed. Maybe I'd wake up smarter in the morning. 20 minutes later, I heard a fist banging on my front door. I trotted downstairs, flipped on the porch light, and peeked outside through a narrow column of windows. Joey stood glaring at the door, looking angry and excited all at once. I opened the door. "Where the hell you been? We called Susan. She said you left there hours ago." "I've been here. I just turned the sound off on my machine. What's wrong?" In the half-second before he could answer, I had a sickening thought. "Is Carly okay?" "Carly's fine. Everybody's fine. But Kelly's been trying to get you for over an hour. Somebody broke into your office. Kelly says the security company called her. She's down there now with the cops, and they need you to come down." "Hang on." And I went inside to get my shoes. 2 minutes later, I was seated in Joey's huge four-wheel drive, and he was speeding toward Mobile. I looked out the window and watched pine trees and underbrush spin by in the dark. Joey asked about my trip to St. George, and I filled him in. As we entered the city's neon outskirts, talk turned to the break-in, and Joey said, "One more crummy thing and a crummy day, eh?" "Maybe not." "You like having somebody break into your office?" "Not much, but at least something's happening. I sat around all day down at Susan's drinking coffee and wondering what to do next. I did learn a few things from the painters, but now at least the coincidences are starting to pile up, and we can begin trying to make some sense out of it. That all sounds real good, but somebody still busted in your office tonight, and probably took some of your favorite lawyer stuff." "Lawyer stuff?" Joey didn't elaborate. We were on city streets now, close to the Oswin Israel building where my violated office and, I hoped, some answers awaited. "I'm going to call Susan and tell her to get hold of Carly, maybe bring her to the beach house and lock everything up tight until we can think this out." "Probably a good idea. Susan got a gun?" "I have no idea." I used Joey's cell phone to get Susan. She promised to pick up Carly from work and keep her at the beach house. Susan reminded me of the guard at the gate to the plantation and said she also had a .38 revolver. I hung up as Joey turned into my parking lot. Upstairs, Kelly was waiting in the reception area. Looks like they got scared off. A pair of blue uniforms lounged on the sofa drinking coffee that I guessed Kelly had brewed for them in my new Krupp's machine. One of the officers started to stand. I said, Let me look around first, okay? He nodded and sat back down. His was not a controlling personality. As I walked back to my office, I asked Kelly, Nothing's missing? Kelly followed. Almost nothing. I made a quick inventory of the desk drawers, the small wall safe, and the few expensive odds and ends on my walls and shelves. I sat down behind my desk to think. Joey strolled in holding a mug of steaming coffee in each giant paw and put one down in front of me. Then he plopped into a leather guest chair and sipped his coffee. Kelly sat in a chair that matched the one Joey was overflowing, looked across the desk and said, The policemen want you to sign some kind of report. They couldn't find any fingerprints or anything like that, by the way. What do you mean almost nothing is missing? What? Oh, it's creepy. Right now it looks like whoever broke in just grabbed the appointment calendar off my desk and took off. Your appointment calendar? Are you sure that's all? I've got to look around some more, but like I said, right now, that looks like it. A shapeless but vaguely disturbing thought was worming around in the back of my head. I let it work through, and my stomach began to squeeze into a knot. Kelly, did you put Susan Fitzsimmons' name in the appointment book today? Sure, I put all your appointments in there. Joey cussed as he and I jumped up and ran out of the office. As we rushed through the waiting room, the two cops looked surprised. They didn't move, but they did appear to consider the option. Joey was a former shore patrolman, former Navy intelligence officer, former Alabama state trooper, and former Alabama Bureau of Investigation agent. In fact, former would serve as a pretty accurate one-word description of his career in law enforcement, all of which sounds worse in some ways than it is. Joey was never unreliable unless you were counting on him to follow orders or to treat an employee handbook like the Word of God. And when things get serious, attitude and obstinacy and confidence are what I want. Boy Scouts scare the shit out of me. Now on the highway east of Mobile, Joey was driving like the cop he used to be, going 90-plus on two-lane roads. And like a cop, he seemed to be in complete control behind the wheel as trees, houses, shops, and other traffic whirled by as varying shapes and colors in the night. She's not there. It was the fourth time I had punched in Susan St. George number. Shit. Can you call that deputy from Apalachicola? What am I supposed to say? Hello, officer. Somebody kicked in the door of my office in Mobile tonight, and now my secretary can't find her appointment book. So I was wondering if you'd mind driving back out on the island there and checking on a female client who I told you earlier today was a man. And, by the way, I know I wouldn't tell you the client's name today, and I'm still trying to keep it a secret because it might put her in danger, but... Oh, you got a better idea? I didn't like it, but I dialed up North Florida information, and then the sheriff's office in Apalachicola. Deputy Mickey Burns was off duty. We have a deputy on patrol. Is this an emergency? Well, I don't know. Probably not. I just asked for Deputy Burns because he helped me earlier today. I'm a lawyer in Mobile. I've got a client on the island who may be in trouble. It'd be a big help if your patrolman could just ride by and check on her. The operator agreed to do just that. I gave her the address and said goodbye. You know, if you don't say it's an emergency, they'll take fucking forever to get there. Yeah, I know. But I'd have to do a lot of explaining to call in an emergency on St. George from a car phone in Alabama. We're in Florida now. Thanks for the update. But to make it an emergency, you usually have to say someone's inside your house or you're in some kind of imminent danger. I know all that. I used to be a cop. Then what are you bitching about? I just don't like it. The truth was that we were both worried and irritated and feeling impotent and in general acting pretty graceless under pressure. I asked, how much longer? If we don't run into any blue lights, we'll be there in less than 2 hours. I glanced at the digital clock on the dash, 10:33. Yellow-tinged high beams swept gray pavement ahead of the expedition as it lunged and swayed and rocked along Highway 98 northwest of Panama City. Every 10 or 20 miles, bright eyes stared and fixed on the headlights as white walls froze along the roadside. It'd be hard to miss a deer at this speed if it was on the road. Joey said, "Fuck 'em." More road. Joey turned on the radio and played with the search button until he found a soft rock station. I put up with Mariah Carey for a while, then reached over and turned it off when an old Journey song came on. Joey didn't complain. I don't think he realized I had done it. We'd been outside of cellular range for some time. As we neared Panama City, the in-service light flashed on, and I tried Susan again. She answered on the third ring. "Where have you been? Are you okay?" Susan sounded surprised. "I'm fine. You knew I was going to pick up Carly from work." "You've been gone a long time." "She didn't get off till after 10. I had to wait. What's wrong? Has something else happened?" "I don't want to scare you." "Then that's not a good way to start. Sorry, look. Somebody broke into my office about 3 hours ago. All they took was Kelly's appointment book. It probably doesn't mean anything, but the book had your name in it. And, you know, after everything that happened today—" "We're fine, Tom. Carly's here. We're locked up in the house. There's a guard at the gate, and I put the .38 in my purse. Go back to sleep. We can figure all this out in the morning." I said something like, "Is there more to it?" "Well, kind of. Joey and I got worried when we couldn't get you, and we're most of the way there. We'll probably be knocking on your door in about an hour." "Tom, that's sweet." Now she sounded amused. "Like I told you, we're fine. But you're almost here now, so you might as well come on. I'll put some coffee on." It was Joey's idea. After I ended the connection, Joey said, "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "What was that about something being my idea?" She was thanking me for coming. I looked over at Joey's face in the glow from the dash. He looked like he was thinking about that. "Want to turn around and go home?" No, we've come this far. I'll feel better if we go have a look around." The dash clock glowed 12:18 as we pulled into Susan's driveway, and a motion detector light popped on. Susan met us at the door. We were sitting at the butcher block table drinking decaffeinated coffee when Carly descended the dark staircase and walked into the downstairs light. She wore a maroon Florida football jersey for a nightgown, and a huge white towel wound round and covered her head like a turban. Wet black curls peeked out from beneath the towel. Susan said, "Feel better?" Carly just smiled and sat down next to Joey. Susan introduced them. "Did you, tell Carly why we're here?" "I told her about your break-in. I also told her there's no reason to get worked up over it, right? We don't have any reason to think the break-in was connected to Carly in any way, do we?" As she spoke the last two words, Susan gave me a meaningful look. I'm not stupid, or if I am, I can at least take a hint. I looked at Carly and said, No reason at all. Joey and I are only here because we tried to call Susan to tell her about the burglary and we couldn't get her. If we had known she was just out picking you up from work, we would have stayed in Mobile. I wasn't the only non-stupid person at the table. Carly said, But your office got broken into after I talked with you today about those guys on the beach. And Susan told me what happened with those painters at the beach house where it happened. Carly, it's easy to tie unrelated problems together when you're scared. But like Susan says, Carly kept going, you called here right after you figured out Susan's name was in that book they stole. And you drove all the way here at midnight when we didn't answer the telephone. Silence hung in the air above the table. Isn't that right, Mr. McInnes? You can call me Tom. Carly sighed and lowered her eyes to stare at gnawed, glitter-pink fingernails. Carly, you really don't need to worry. Not about my office break-in anyhow. You have to understand my and Joey's history with Susan. I got her into a pretty nasty mess about 6 months ago, and she ended up getting hurt pretty badly. Susan interrupted with surprising force. That was not your fault. She held my eyes for a few beats and then turned to face Carly. My husband was killed last summer. They found Tom's younger brother a couple of months later on the bottom of the Alabama River. It wasn't easy and it cost him, but Tom found out what happened. While he was doing it, I got attacked by someone involved in both deaths, but that wasn't because Tom did anything wrong or messed anything up. I opened my mouth to interrupt without really knowing what I wanted to say, but Susan kept talking. She was still looking at Carly. I just want you to understand that Tom feels some misplaced duty to me because of what happened. That's why he and Joey drove down here in the middle of the night, and, as much as I hate to admit it, even to myself, that's how I knew he would drop everything and help you if I asked him to. Carly looked up at me for a moment. The towel on her hair had tilted to one side, and the insides of her eyelids, the part just inside her lashes, had turned red. I tried to smile reassuringly. Carly's brown irises seemed to grow larger, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and unsure. I was up all night last night. I gotta go to bed. And she got up and climbed the stairs. I looked at Susan. You're right, she's not stupid. Susan nodded slowly. More there than meets the eye. Yeah, but well-adjusted she's not. Susan shrugged. Who is? It was past 1 a.m, and suddenly I was bored tired. It's been a long day. We'd better go and let you get to bed, too. Joey said, I don't know where you're going, Hoss, but I'm tired, and I'm staying right here if it's okay with Susan. Susan said, it's perfect. If you're as bushed as I am, you don't have any business driving anyhow. I was up most of the night last night with Carly, and I know Tom's wiped out because I called and woke him before sunrise. And he woke me up to tell me about it, Joey said. Well then, Susan said, I suggest we all hit the sack and think this through in the morning. The house had exactly 4 bedrooms, which was exactly how many we needed. Upstairs, Susan showed us past Carly's closed door to the empty rooms. Joey said good night, walked down the hall to find the bathroom. Susan walked me to my room, clicked on the bedside lamp, and turned to look at me. She sounded tired and a little hoarse when she spoke. All she said was, thanks. I looked down into her upturned face. Missleep and tension showed around her eyes, but they were beautiful eyes. Very quickly, Susan rocked forward onto her toes, kissed me lightly on the lips, and left the room, closing the door behind her. I stripped down to boxers, switched the light off, and stretched out on top of the covers. I smiled up at the ceiling. My mouth still tingled where her lips had brushed against mine. I didn't think I'd been asleep when Joey shook me awake. He was whispering, Wake up, Papa. Wake up. We need to look around. I rubbed my eyes and looked at my watch. I was too groggy to focus on the glowing dots and lines that were supposed to show me what time it was. What's the matter? What's the matter? I thought I heard something a couple of times. Then the bedroom clock went out. I was too tired for all this. What are you talking about? He sounded exasperated. The power's out, you understand that? I sat up. He went on. The phone's dead, too. Something's going on, and I'm going to go look around a little. I need you to keep an eye on Susan and Carly. I swung my feet onto the floor and felt for my pants. I said, Go! And Joey moved silently through the door and down the hallway. I managed to pull on pants and loafers. My shirts and socks had disappeared on the dark carpet, and I left the room bare-chested. Out in the hall, I found Carly's door, stuck my head inside. A shadowy shape, surprisingly small and childlike, breathed beneath the covers. I eased the door shut and moved to Susan's door, which swung open without a sound. On the wall opposite her bed, open double windows welcomed moonlight and a cool breeze into the room. I crept over and looked outside, wondering who might be out there in the dark with Joey. When I turned to look at Susan, she was looking back. She still sounded tired but wide awake. You scared me. I walked over and stood by the bed. As I approached, Susan sat up, holding the sheet against her breasts. She appeared to be naked beneath the covers. I held my index finger against my lips and then leaned down to whisper, The power and phones are out. Joey's outside checking on it. To her benefit, Susan hesitated only a few seconds before saying, Turn around. I need to get dressed. I walked back over and looked out through the open window. Night air flowed into the room, sprinkling goosebumps across my chest and shoulders, and making me wish I had been able to find my shirt. I scanned the shore and the sand dunes and listened for strange voices or the sound of feet on the wooden deck, or something. Everything just looked and sounded and smelled like a spring night at the beach. Behind me, I could hear Susan walk barefoot across the carpet and open dresser drawers. She asked, Have you checked on Carly? Yeah, she's fine, but I wanted to get you first. I heard Susan slipping her legs into jeans. Afraid you'd scare her? I thought it'd be better if you woke her, but we need to hurry. If somebody's out there, she needs to be up and ready to move. Susan told me I could turn back around. When I did, she was sitting on the bed in jeans and a dark T-shirt, pulling on running shoes. She made loops and knots in the laces and stood up. We moved down the hall. Carly's door was closed. Inside, the delicate shape I had seen breathing under the covers was gone. Fine lines of moonlight angled through mini-blinds and faintly streaked Carly's empty bed with light. Visibly shocked, Susan said a little too loudly, Where is she? I shushed her and made a quick search of the closet and the floor beneath the bed, thinking, hoping the girl had heard something and tried to hide. I looked at Susan and said, I don't know. Come on. The hall was preternaturally dark. No windows, no electricity, just black. I ducked into my bedroom and Joey's and then checked the bathroom. Back in the hallway, I leaned in close to Susan. She probably heard something and got up to look around. I think we would have heard some kind of scuffle if something worse than that happened. Maybe she heard Joey. Where's that .38 you told me about? In my purse. I think it's on the kitchen table. I looked at her as she said, You know, downstairs. I wasn't that sleepy. I knew damn well where the kitchen table was. I just wasn't happy about it. I thought about asking Susan to stay upstairs, but decided I didn't want to take a chance on losing someone else. I also realized that with Carly missing and probably in trouble, Susan wasn't likely to take instructions from me and hide in the closet while I ran around doing manly things. I said, "Stay with me, okay?" and led the way to the circular aluminum staircase. 3 steps down, I heard a soft hiss and froze. Susan heard it too. She stopped as still as death. A sharp whisper from the kitchen. "Tom!" The glass wall along the front of the living room allowed a diffused fog of gray light into the room. Joey stepped out from a shadow and whispered, "Carly's here." Thank God! I started down the stairs and was quickly stopped by another hiss. I looked down and back toward the kitchen where Joey stood in the shadows. He appeared to be holding up 3 fingers, waving them back and forth like a kid saying bye-bye. Then he pointed at the glass door leading out onto the deck. I looked, but saw nothing. I looked back toward Joey and still saw nothing. He had disappeared. I glanced at Susan. She was looking past me toward the deck. I whispered, "What?" She held up an index finger, telling me to wait. I watched her pale eyes scan back and forth and stop. She tapped my shoulder and pointed. The glass wall, overlooking the gulf, was made of 10-foot squares of tempered glass separated by thick cypress beams. Silhouetted against the outside of one of the vertical beams was a very human shape. I held up 1 finger. Susan nodded. She shook her head when I held up 2. I pointed to where Joey had been and held up 3 fingers. She nodded and raised her palms in the air. We agreed. Joey said 3. We saw 1. Another hiss. Joey's hand and arm materialized out of kitchen shadows and motioned us back upstairs. We watched the silhouette outside run from one beam to the next. He held a long, thick gun at an angle across his midsection, maybe a shotgun. When he flattened against the second beam, Susan and I tiptoed back up to the hallway. She asked, "Has Joey got a gun?" Joey's always got a gun, but 1 pistol against 3 rifles or shotguns is a real bad idea. And Joey's got a scared 15-year-old girl to take care of. Can't we help him? I tried to slow my breathing and think. She was scared and talking fast. What do you think he wants us to do? Joey waved us up here, so it's probably safe in the house for now. But if there are 3 of them with guns and they come inside, there won't be much we can do but hide. Look, everybody but you and me and Carly has a gun. And Carly's with Joey. We've got to trust Joey to look after her. He's going to expect me to do the same for you. I'm not 15, Tom. In fact, Susan was a few years older than I was, even if she didn't look it. I said, we can get politically correct later. Right now, we need to figure out how we're going to get out of here if that guy on the deck comes inside. The stairs are the only way down, but we can go up. A light bulb went off. Crow's nest? Yeah, but there's no way down from there unless... Can we? A shotgun blast shattered the quiet. Glass exploded downstairs and footsteps crunched across broken windows. Susan gasped and yanked my arm by the elbow. I turned to look, and she was hauling ass. I caught her as she hooked the left and charged up a short flight of steps that dead-ended into the ceiling. She twisted some little knob I couldn't even see and pushed open a hatch. Stars filled a 3-by-4-foot hole in the roof. Susan shot through, and I followed. Up on the catwalk, I quietly fitted the hatch back into place. We crouched on narrow strips of teak that made the bantered catwalk look like a miniaturized deck. We had a space about 6 feet wide and 20 feet long and nowhere to hide. Susan breathed hard. She said, "Do you think we'll be able to stay here?" I looked around. "Do we have a choice?" "Well, there's a palm over there at the back corner. The roof's steep, but if we could figure out how to slide down at an angle somehow, we could get hold of it and climb down to the driveway." "What?" She started to explain again, and I stopped her. "Listen." The house was quiet. "What the hell? Susan, come here. Stay low. Get over here. We better sit on the hatch. They might shoot through it. They might just try it and move on. It's better than leaving it open so they can pop through and shoot at us." As Susan started to edge over, she glanced through the banisters toward the shoreline. She said, "Look," and pointed down at the beach. We saw a figure in dark clothes kneeling in the sand, and he saw us. A black shape moved in his hands, and a sharp rap sounded a split second before something small and hard and deadly hit the copper roof below us. "Let's do it. Stay low and go through the banisters. Don't go over them." Susan wiggled through a repeating diamond shape in the banister and began inching down the side of the steep metal roof opposite the beach. Easing my head to the far edge of the catwalk, I looked for the gunman. He was motioning to someone in the house. He was motioning at the roof. Shit! Belly crawling to the other side, I found Susan flat on her back, butt against the roof with both feet wedged in the rain gutter. She was 8 feet away from the palm fronds and inching her way there not nearly fast enough. Just in case, I tried to fit my shoulders through the banister. It wasn't even close. Taking a deep breath, I came off my knees at a full run and vaulted over the railing. I expected to hear or maybe even feel another gunshot. The guy on the beach just stood there. He probably couldn't believe his eyes. To all the world, it had to look like I was leaping into a full gainer over the driveway. It felt that way, too. I hit the copper roof on my right hip and bare shoulder blade and started sliding like a downed skier on a patch of ice. I managed to get my butt under me and my head up in time to nail the gutter with my heels. The jolt jammed my knees and ankles, knocked the section of gutter loose, and flipped me forward into a face full of palm tree. It hurt like hell. I hurt everywhere, but I managed to grab fists full of spiky fronds and hold on. The world scrambled for a second. When it fell back into place, I looked around for Susan. She had fallen sideways trying to grab me before I flipped off the roof, and she was almost gone. Her feet were on the roof's edge. Her right hand had a death grip on the piece of gutter I had slammed loose, and her left hand was reaching out for me. Clenching a thick frond with my right fist, I bent my knees, swung to the left, using the frond as a pivot, and grabbed Susan's hand. Her grip on the gutter came loose, and I swung her into the tree trunk with a painful thud. She held on. "Go, Susan! They know we're back here." She started down the trunk and, with me shinnying behind her, had made it to within 6 feet of the ground when 3 gunshots snapped the night air. Susan dropped. Joey yelled, "Move! They're coming! Move!" Susan scrambled to her feet and ran. I dropped 10 feet, executed an unplanned and painful backward somersault, and sprinted down the driveway. Up ahead, Susan veered left into underbrush, and I followed her. Out of nowhere, a hand grabbed my wrist and spun me into the ground. As I landed in seagrass, Joey said, "Stay down." I did. Joey sat crouched in a shooter's stance with his .45 automatic leveled at the house. Susan lay on the ground next to him. Susan, did you get hit?" Joey said, "Nobody got hit. None of us, anyway. That was me shooting. One of them came round a corner while you two were monkeying around that tree, so I fired 3 rounds. Think I hit him." Susan reached over and squeezed my hand to let me know she was okay. Joey said, "Here they come. We better go." Tearing through seagrass, cockleburs, wild azaleas, yucca plants, and 1,000 species of lowland briar bushes, Joey ran full out ahead of us for what seemed like a couple 100 yards. Next to a wooden walkway that stretched from the road to the beach so normal people could avoid the brush and thorns we had just run through, Joey stopped, motioned with his head, and said, "See that big funny-looking bush?" I looked, and it was kind of funny-looking. "Yeah." "Carly's over there. I'll be back. If I'm not, stay away from the house and figure out some way to get Susan and the girl out of here." I started to say something to tell him I'd come with him, but he was gone. Susan walked toward Joey's bush. I followed. We found Carly sitting in a fetal position on the dark side of the bush away from the moonlight. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She hugged her knees and rocked and looked impossibly small. Susan sat on the sand and put an arm around Carly's shoulders. I found some shadow nearby where a big funny-looking bush wasn't blocking half the world from view. I peered into the dark and watched for nameless, faceless men who had come to murder 2 women in a house on the beach. Minutes crept by. In the distance, sirens swirled through the night air. 2 shots popped almost quaintly further down the coastline. More time passed. The sirens grew louder as Joey emerged out of the underbrush. I met him at his bush next to Susan and Carly. I asked, "What happened? I heard a couple more shots." Joey said, "That was me. When I got back to the house, they were loading one of them into a pontoon boat on the sand, so I did hit him. Anyway, when he was in, one stayed with him, and the other jumped out and looked like he might come back for more. I took a couple of shots, and he jumped behind a boat and pulled it into the water. They took off." Susan said, "Did you shoot to scare them off?" "Hell no. I shot to kill the son of a bitch. He was just too far away for me to hit him with a pistol. They were getting ready to haul ass anyway. One of them was shot. You could hear cops coming." I asked, "Are the police there now?" "Probably are. I didn't stay around to find out." He wedged his .45 in the back of his waistband, looked at me, and said, "So, counselor, that's what I do. Now, do what you do. What's the plan?" Susan and Carly were silent. The teenager was still now, but she still hugged her knees tightly against her breasts. Susan stroked her hair. You got a license for that gun in Florida?" Joey said. "No, licensed in Alabama, not here." "Okay. Susan and I are going back. You look after Carly. Take her wherever you need to keep her out of sight. But," I pointed at the street end of the wooden walkway, "beyond the path next to the road in, let's see, it's about 2:20 now. Be there at 3:30. "What are you going to say?" "Don't worry about it. You and Carly were never there. See you at 3:30. Susan, you ready?" Susan hugged Carly and whispered something I couldn't hear. On the way back, I briefed Susan, telling her to stay as close as possible to the facts with only the changes we specifically discussed. 20 yards from the house, I led her onto the pavement so we could approach along the driveway. Jumping out of the bushes at a bunch of nervous, heavily armed deputies seemed like a bad idea. As we neared her drive, a deputy stationed to keep people out said, "What the hell?" Susan's now filthy T-shirt was ripped across her stomach where she had snagged it on the palm. Cuts and scratches covered her arms, and dirt smudged her face. I was worse, having scrambled down a palm tree, rolled around the driveway, and torn through Brer Rabbit's playground without a shirt. A grapefruit-sized strawberry covered my left nipple. From the waist up, I was pretty much one big stinging scrape. "I'm Tom McInnes. This is Susan Fitzsimmons. This is her house." The deputy seemed to think about that for a second before he pulled out a nickel-plated revolver with a 6-inch barrel and pointed it at us. "Walk up to the house." And that's what we did.